Hello. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kendi Duncan. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Louisburg area. On behalf of that league, I'd like to welcome the candidates, our members, our friends, and the community to the first of the two candidates nights being held in preparation for the May 18th primary. We will begin this evening's event, as we do all of our meetings and events, with the reading of the league's nonpartisan statement. The League of Women Voters of the Lewisburg area is nonpartisan, meaning it neither endorses nor opposes a political party or candidate for political office. The choice made in 1920 by the National League to neither support nor oppose any political party or candidate for public office continues today to ensure that the League's voice is heard above the tumult of party politics. Nonpartisanship towards candidates and political parties is critical to the effectiveness of the League's unique voter service and citizen information work. In keeping with the League's goal of voter education and civil discourse, we provide forums to encourage thoughtful consideration of important and timely topics. The League values the differing viewpoints held by all attendees at these events. We request your cooperation in providing an atmosphere for listening and respectful discussion. We ask you abide by and respect this nonpartisan policy in your words and actions. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce our moderator for the evening. It's Mary Beth Clark, who is our Vice President of Programs. Mary Beth.
Thank you, Kendi. Good evening. As Kendi stated, my name is Mary Beth Clark, and I will be the moderator this evening. The League sponsors nonpartisan candidate nights to help voters become informed about the candidates in contested races and their views on the issues. One of the goals of tonight's event is to create an open atmosphere for the candidates to answer questions from the League and the audience. This event is an opportunity for citizens to be educated about the featured candidates and their positions. We therefore ask the candidates to focus on the issues and the ideas that distinguish them and maintain a civil and non-inflammatory response to questions. Tonight's event will be recorded from start to finish. Within the next few days, the complete and unedited recording of this event will be published on YouTube. Links to this recording will also be available on our League's Facebook page, League of Women Voters, Lewisburg Area, and on our website, lwvlewisburgarea.org. At tonight's event, the candidates will be asked questions received from individuals who registered for this event, as well as questions prepared in advance by the League's Voter Services Committee. League questions were developed from a variety of sources, including suggestions from League members and League resources. Registrant and League questions were screened using the following criteria. The questions are relevant to current issues and to the office being considered. They are carefully phrased to prevent bias and partisanship and to avoid duplication. I will announce when the questions being asked are League questions. The remaining questions will be from residents who submitted their questions online. The first part of this evening's event pertains to the candidates for the Court of Common Pleas for the 17th Judicial District. Every judge and judicial candidate for the Pennsylvania courts must abide by the Pennsylvania Code of Judicial Conduct. Under that code, judicial candidates may not make pledges, promises, or commitments on specific issues or cases that might come before them. This is to protect the impartiality of the bench and to give the public confidence that judges will act on the facts and law before them. Thus, if a registrant question was submitted that violated this requirement, it will not be asked. The timing for the first panel this evening will be as follows. The candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 1 minute for a closing statement, and because we only have one candidate for the judicial position this evening, there will not be a rebuttal, so he will be given 1 minute, 30 seconds to answer questions. During opening and closing statements, I will hold up a yellow card when 30 seconds remain and a red card when time is up. The same will happen when answering questions. I ask that the candidate honor these time restrictions. Let's move on. The first panel this evening is for the contested race for Judge of the Court of Common Pleas of the 17th Judicial District. There are two candidates for this position. With me this evening is candidate Brian Kerstetter. The other candidate, Lori Hackenberg, declined our invitation to attend. Both candidates for this position cross-filed as a Republican and as a Democratic candidate, which is not uncommon in judicial races. If one candidate wins both the Republican and the Democratic primary, then he or she runs unopposed in the general election this fall. Thus, this primary is quite important to this race. Let me just take a minute to describe the office of the Judge of the Court of Common Pleas. Courts of Common Pleas are the trial courts in Pennsylvania. Major civil and criminal cases are heard in these courts. Judges also decide cases involving adoption, divorce, child custody, abuse, juvenile delinquency, estates, guardianship, charitable organizations, and other matters. Snyder and Union counties are combined into the 17th Judicial District under two judges. The current president's judge, Judge Michael Hudak, is retiring. The term for this position is 10 years. Mr. Kerstetter, you may begin with your 2-minute opening statement.
Well, good evening, and let me first say thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. I know that cuts into my 2 minutes worth of time, but I think it's necessary to acknowledge all of you folks who have taken the time to put this together, especially in these times. It's nice that we were able to do it, if not in person, then by Zoom. So thank you all for your efforts in that regard. As Mary Beth indicated, my name is Brian Kerstetter. I've been a lifelong resident of the Lewisburg area, except for 3 years when I lived in Selinsgrove. And that was right after I graduated from law school. I built my permanent home in Kelly Township right after that, and I've lived there ever since. I'm the father of an almost 18-year-old daughter who's off to Pitt in the fall. She was able to shadow me for a jury trial last week. I think she enjoyed that experience. I don't know if she's going to have any interest in the law going on down the road or not. I've been practicing law for 21 years. 17 of those years, I've been a prosecutor in the district attorney's office over in Snyder County. During that time, I've conducted over 100 jury trials, probably over 500 other trials, whether they be in juvenile cases or some other form of bench trial. So I have just a ton of courtroom and trial experience, thanks to that position as first assistant district attorney in Snyder County. I've had numerous other engagements as an attorney. I'm endorsed by the Pennsylvania State Troopers Association, the Union and Snyder County District Attorneys, the Lycoming County District Attorney, and over 27 retired and practicing attorneys in Union and Snyder County.
Thank you. The first question will be a lead question. Why do you want to be a Court of Common Pleas judge?
Good question. I feel like at this point, I've done just about all there is to do in the private practice of law. I think that the bench would benefit from some younger blood. I didn't point out as part of my opening that I'm 47 years old, so I can spend a significant amount of time on the bench if the voters choose to have me do so. As I indicated, I have a great deal of experience in the day-to-day operations that judges of Court of Common Pleas get themselves involved in. I'm ready for a change. I'm ready to do something different in a place where I feel like I can do the most good.
Thank you. The second question is also a lead question. Tell us about a life experience that will shape your judicial philosophy.
A life experience. Well, there's probably been a ton of life experiences. Part of my work history when I grew up was doing hardwood floor installation and refinishing, and that is, quite frankly, a backbreaking job. It's a sweaty job in the 90-degree heat in the summer, working on the third floor of a farmhouse. That job instilled in me a sense of hard work, and it instilled in me a sense of discipline. And I would like to think that I would bring those experiences to the bench. From a very young age, I got to interact with people on a regular basis doing that job. I got to develop a rapport with them. As I got older, I basically got to manage that business. And it's those skills that I think that I can bring into the courtroom that will make me a good judge who's sensitive to the fact that people are coming in there in very stressful times, some of the most stressful times in their lives, and that I will treat them with an ounce of dignity and respect and give them assurance that their case will be heard and fairly decided.
The third question is also a lead question. Equality under law is an essential legal concept. What does that mean to you? What would you do if elected to enhance diversity and inclusion in the judicial system and ensure justice for all?
Well, that's a good question. Relatively difficult answer. I saw some statistics some time ago that indicated as many as 75% of litigants in civil cases are unrepresented. At least one party to the suit is unrepresented. And that sometimes prevents equal access to justice for some folks. I think what we can do to help ensure that everybody has equal access to justice is perhaps try to provide some greater funding for legal services agency who provide representation to individuals in cases at little or no cost to them. I mean, obviously, that's not a function of the judicial branch, the system where I would be. That's going to have to be more of a legislative matter. But in terms of philosophy, I think that's a pretty good idea. I've toyed around with ideas of having a greater access to, let's say, third-year law students who are available with a student practice certificate to assist people who are going into the courtroom, greater access to legal forms to assist pro se litigants in handling their own cases, perhaps even incentives for admitted attorneys to provide pro bono legal services to litigants, things such as perhaps some CLE credit for providing pro bono legal services. That's something that we actually tossed around at our last Union Snyder Bar Association meeting. So the question's timely, it's a good one. That's how I would respond.
So let's move on to registering questions. What is your position on alternatives to bail and the use of a day reporting center or a resource center?
My position in that regard as an alternative to bail?
Yes.
If the day reporting center is used properly, I think it can provide an invaluable tool. Bail is always designed to secure an individual's appearance at future court proceedings. If at any time we have a concern that an individual isn't going to appear for court proceedings, that's when bail gets set and individuals can be incarcerated so that we can be sure that they will attend. As long as a day reporting center can assist in that regard, then I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. There's also an element when fashioning bail of protection of the public. If we have individuals who are charged with serious crimes, even though they are, of course, entitled to the presumption of innocence, there has to be an element of that that's taken into consideration. And again, as long as the day reporting center can ensure that the public is protected, and again, that the individuals are going to appear at future court proceedings, I don't think it's a bad idea. Obviously, we have a prison overcrowding problem, so anything that we can do to minimize that is certainly a good thing.
The next registering question, are we doing all we can regarding early intervention strategies, treatment courts, and alternative sentencing? If not, what more can be done?
At this point, I think we're doing all we can. Funding is a major issue. Again, we have a prison population problem. Our jails are overcrowded. There is a huge push in order to relieve the financial burden on taxpayers to come up with alternative sentencing ideas, drug treatment courts, DUI treatment courts, veterans courts, mediation programs, et cetera. And I would certainly propose to continue on with those things to hopefully alleviate some of the burden on the taxpayers by having to straight out incarcerate individuals who are convicted of crimes, or as an early intervention type of idea to prevent them from becoming recidivist offenders down the road. I mean, that's a goal. Our drug and DUI treatment courts have been shown to reduce recidivism. I think the last statistics I saw were recidivism rates of about 55% for individuals who are not involved in treatment court programs and 45% for those who are. So it's definitely working. It is a good, viable alternative. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Let's shift gears a bit. How would you enhance the use of alternative dispute resolution in civil matters?
Well, we try and do that somewhat now. Our local rules require that any civil matters that have a claim in controversy of $50,000 or less are automatically referred to an arbitration panel. And that arbitration panel consists of three local attorneys who are selected at random. It's actually 5 attorneys who are selected at random, and then each individual litigant gets 2 strikes, so that you have a panel of 3 arbiters who will hear a case. The arbiters hear the case, they render a decision, and then the litigants have the opportunity to file an appeal then to the Court of Common Pleas. So certainly continuing on with those types of things would be beneficial. Might even consider reducing that dollar figure. Some counties go as low as $25,000. I believe Union and Snyder County upped it to $50,000 some time ago.
Judges usually stick within sentencing guidelines, starting with the gravity of the offense and then working through a checklist. Could you describe a scenario which could result in a sentence outside the sentencing guidelines?
Yeah, anytime a judge sentences outside the guidelines, they have to state their reasons on the record as to why they are doing so. There may be certain aggravating circumstances that causes a judge to sentence above the standard range of the sentencing guidelines. There may be mitigating factors that causes a judge to sentence below the standard range of the sentencing guidelines. What folks need to know about the sentencing guidelines is that they are the standard range of sentences are the recommended minimum offenses, and there is a scale, so to speak, with a minimum sentence being probation, perhaps up to 3 months or 6 months or something like that. And that would be the recommended minimum sentence. But if there are aggravating circumstances present, if there are mitigating circumstances present, then certainly those factors can and should be taken into consideration when fashioning a sentence. I don't have any specific examples to give anyone, but if there are aggravating circumstances, again, they should be considered. Mitigating factors should be considered as well. Some cases warrant a fine only and no jail sentence, assuming the individual has an opportunity or the ability to pay a fine. So all those things need to be taken into consideration when fashioning a sentence.
Thank you. What ethical positions do you hold that will influence you as a judge?
Ethical positions, interesting. Well, I've been a district attorney for 17 years, and I think that's a position that's held in pretty high regard. Our ethical rules in Pennsylvania contain special rules even for prosecutors. There are certain sections in the rules of professional conduct that provide for what we are and what we are not allowed to do as prosecutors. Other than that, all attorneys are bound by the same rules of professional conduct. Call them ethics, if you will. They're pretty lengthy. There's a separate bar exam that all attorneys have to take now when they're admitted to the bar regarding just ethics. That's in addition to the multi-state portion of the bar exam and the essay portion of the bar exam. So I think any attorney is involved in a quote unquote ethical type of position, and they always need to be mindful of those rules of professional conduct. And as a judge, the four canons of judicial conduct that all judges have to follow in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Let me continue on with some other submitted questions. Please talk to us about your specific values, skills, and experience will best serve our children and families in the 17th Judicial District.
Well, I've had a passion for protecting families for a long time. As I indicated, I'm the father of an almost 18-year-old daughter, so I've had the opportunity to raise her. As I also indicated, I've been a juvenile prosecutor over in the district attorney's office for Snyder County for probably the first 5 years of my career. And in that regard, I was involved in delinquency cases and dependency cases with juveniles. Ultimately, the name of the game in those cases is to keep families intact as much as possible. And I never lost sight of that. There were cases where children had to be removed from their families and placed in foster care or placed in some sort of a residential treatment facility, what amounts to jail, really, for juveniles. But the goal in my mind was always reunification with a family, if that were possible. So I'd like to think that I bring the same, or I will bring the same sort of family values that I held dear as a prosecutor onto the bench as well.
Could you give a hypothetical that could cause you to ponder overturning a jury's decision in a civil or criminal case?
I can give you a piece of life experience in that regard. I actually did a jury trial years ago in an assault case, and it was at, if I recall correctly, the old Chuck's Sports Bar in Selinsgrove, and probably a day's worth of testimony. And I was the prosecutor. I can't recall who defense counsel was, but Judge Wolfel was on the bench at the time. And the jury came back with a guilty verdict. So I was quite happy about that. I think the charges amounted to a felony aggravated assault and some lesser included offenses. Judge Wolfel, as he typically did, would go back and meet with the jury afterwards. And he came back out, and I happened to be still sitting there talking with the arresting officer. And Judge Wolfel had an odd look on his face. And he got everyone in and got everyone back on the record. And he indicated that the jury had been drawing pictures on a whiteboard back in the jury room. And it was absolutely nothing that had to do with any of the testimony that was presented during the trial. It was jurors trying to educate other jurors on the layout of Chuck's Sports Bar when that was not part of the testimony that was introduced at trial. And Judge Wolfel was constrained at that point to declare a mistrial. So I've actually seen that happen. It can happen. And so I don't need to give you a hypothetical on something like that. That actually happened, and it was the right call on his part, as disappointed as I was.
Do you see any problems in the process of selection of jury panels in our district? And what would you do to ensure a broader base of selection of jurors?
I don't see a major problem with it because the jurors in the 17th Judicial District are chosen at random. A lot of folks are under the mistaken impression that you have to be a registered voter in either Union or Snyder County to be selected for jury duty. That is absolutely not the case. There are other roles that are looked at when potential jury panels are being selected. You could actually have a friend who volunteers you for legal service or for jury service. When we tell juries that on jury selection day, that always goes over well. Usually there's a few laughs from the audience, and the folks can count on both hands the number of folks that they'd like to volunteer for the jury selection process. I think we do a pretty good job by doing it random as it is. I really don't have any other suggestions about how to change it. I think we get a reasonably good cross section of the public for jury trials. So I think we're doing a pretty good job in that regard. I really don't have any great suggestions for change there.
A final question from the registrants. What changes would you like to see in the way the business of the courts is conducted in Union and Snyder counties? And how do you see COVID having influenced courtroom procedures and the use of technology for the future?
Well, that's a really, really good question. COVID has been an obvious blessing and a curse. It's been a curse for obvious reasons, but it has also been a blessing regarding the implementation of technology that has begun to take place in both of the courtrooms. A year and 2 months ago, neither the Snyder or the Union County courtrooms were equipped with cameras, with audio systems that were capable of conducting hearings. Now we are having folks able to testify from their homes in jury trials, in other types of hearings. Physicians are being able to come to court via some means of technology, whether it's Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, one of those mediums to provide their testimony and not having to interrupt an entire day with their patients. COVID has really been a blessing in terms of getting some technology implemented in the courtroom, and I'm a huge believer in technology. I would certainly like to continue down that path if I'm elected to the bench.
Thank you. Mr. Kerstetter, you may proceed with your closing statement. You have 1 minute.
Okay, thank you very much. So in closing, I just encourage all of the listeners to talk to the people that I work with on a daily basis, particularly the other attorneys and courthouse staff members. As I've indicated, I've had over 27 local retired and actively practicing attorneys who have endorsed my candidacy. If you talk to these people and when you consider the depth of the experience that I talked about at the beginning, and as I've tried to touch on throughout the questions, I'm certainly hopeful that you all would conclude that I'm the right person for the job.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kerstetter, for participating in this event. The League and the voters of the 17th Judicial District appreciate your willingness to attend this evening.
Thank you so much, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters for hosting.
Now, we will now have a short 1-minute break before we begin the second panel this evening, which is for Democratic candidate for mayor of Louisburg Borough. During this time, we will show some slides and with important dates and information about the May 18th primary.
Your question.
Good evening. The second panel for this evening is for the contested race for the Democratic candidate for mayor of Lewisburg Borough. The candidates with us this evening are Kendi Alvarez and David Hayne. The mayor is the chief law enforcement officer of the borough, the executive administrator of the police department, if there is one, and the elected official who takes charge during the time of an emergency. He or she attends and takes part in the monthly borough council meetings and votes in the case of a tie, unless it involves the hiring or firing of police personnel. The mayor has the power to sign or veto ordinances and regulations, as well as the responsibility for their enforcement. The term of office for mayor is 4 years. Let me again review the timing for the second panel because it'll be a little different. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 1 minute for a closing statement, 1 minute to answer a question, and 30 seconds to give a rebuttal response. During opening and closing statements and during questions, when there's 30 seconds left, I will provide that and stop when your time is up. During the rebuttal, when you have 15 seconds left, I will let you know that and stop when your time is up. I'd ask that when you see the stop, you complete your sentence and end your statement. I really do appreciate that each candidate will honor these time constraints. Ms. Alvarez, you may begin with your opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for this opportunity. My name is Kendi Alvarez. I am a 2006 graduate of Bucknell University. I am also been a resident of Louisburg since immigrating to the United States in 1986. I have attended Louisburg schools. I am a 2020 graduate of Leadership Susquehanna Valley, President Emeritus of the Black Bucknell Alumni Association, past president of the Lewisburg Sunset Rotary. I am currently lead organizer with 1 Million Cup Susquehanna, a board member of the Greater Susquehanna Valley Chamber of Commerce, and a volunteer with both Lewisburg Downtown Partnership and Community Zone. I am running for mayor of Lewisburg because I know that this is a wonderful small town where people can live and play. And I think that its relationship to both Bucknell University and to the surrounding community can be exemplified, and we can be a beacon of light for this region.
Mr. Hayne, you may give your opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So again, thank you also to the League of Women Voters. I think the work that you do is so fundamentally important to our community. As they said, my name is David Hayne. I am actually currently the council member for the 3rd ward in Lewisburg. So that's the kind of west side of the downtown. My wife and I moved here when she became a professor at Bucknell, where she currently holds tenure. And I moved into the borough, I think in 2016, where we purchased a house. I am also a landlord of a rental property. I am currently the executive director of Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, a statewide environmental climate justice organization that prioritizes frontline communities that are vulnerable to environmental change and catastrophe, as well as centering faith narrative as the moral and ethical imperative that should drive us in climate justice. I'm simultaneously the director of public education for a Philadelphia-based nonprofit called Albustan Seeds of Culture, which works with arts, culture, and education, primarily for underprivileged students in the Philadelphia School District and the surrounding area. I, in addition to serving on Borough Council, am a member of the Administrative Finance Committee. I served on the board of the Buffalo Valley Recreational Authority. I am on the Historic Architectural Review Board for the borough. I have quite a lot of past things from college, whereby I was president of this club or that organization, but most of which I don't necessarily need to bring up for this. Previously to taking the jobs of directors of nonprofits and working in that field, I was a professor at Susquehanna University for 4 years and at a variety of other universities, both in the area and in New York and Philadelphia. I taught in grade schools and high schools. I've been a community organizer and a campaigner for a number of years and am truly committed to this community.
Thank you. Let me begin with league questions. The league's first question is, why do you want to be mayor of Lewisburg? You may begin with your answer, Mr. Hayne. You have 1 minute.
I think, I honestly think both Kendi and I both want to be mayor because it's a wonderful community and it would be an honor for either one of us to become mayor of such a community. We've had great former mayors. We have a great council. We do a lot of amazing things in this community. And to be a leader of council, of the local government, of the community is a privilege that I've enjoyed on council and would like to continue in this role as mayor that amplifies the work that I'm already doing in the region, both on a volunteer and personal level, as well as on a professional level with PAIPL. So it's an extension of the organizing and community work that I'm already doing, and something that I truly love because of how much I've appreciated and been welcomed by this community.
Ms. Alvarez, why do you want to be mayor of Louisburg?
I would agree with David. It's definitely an honor to serve this community. For as long as I can remember, looking back, I think that this community has given me a lot. And being mayor gives me an opportunity to give back in ways that are impactful and meaningful. I think that it's an opportunity to represent to people what this community can be, and all of the ways that we come together as a community to support one another, whether it's supporting small businesses, supporting the local community in the ways that we give back. I think that that's one of the things that I really want to do as mayor.
Mr. Hayne, would you like to give a rebuttal?
Not particularly, other than that I think the funny thing for this race is that Kendi and I know each other and are kind of friends. So this is like the least contentious race. I think you said it was a contested race earlier, and I was like, sort of. I mean, I think Kendi and I would both be happy if either one of us is elected, and would continue to work with each other no matter what happens. So,
Ms. Alvarez, would you like to give a rebuttal?
I would agree wholeheartedly. I think that regardless of whether or not I am elected mayor, the work that I do in and around this specific community will continue.
Let me go on to the second lead question. What do you see as the most important function of the mayor? Ms. Alvarez?
Building bridges. I think that more than anything, the most recent history has shown that there's a lot of contentious behavior between organizations, between figureheads. And I think that it's really important because the mayor speaks for the people of the borough of Lewisburg. And it's important that that person understand what it is to build bridges and bring people together, and to recognize that even if someone doesn't necessarily get the outcome that they're looking for, to ensure that their voice is heard and that their concerns are addressed.
Mr. Hayne, what do you see as the most important function of the mayor?
So I think that, I don't want to say two things because it would be two things, but the spokesperson and kind of executor for it. It's the person that, as Kendi also said, like brings it out into the community. It's the person that listens to the community. It's the person that really is the negotiator, the front-facing person for all of the actions of this community. And it's one that requires a lot of subtlety and nuance and care in that, both for the overall mission of what's being executed, but it's really the primary role is as kind of a public relations person. And I think that what the mayor needs is also somebody who's willing to fight for those things that needs to be fought for. I don't want conflict any more than anybody else, but there are times where we need somebody to stand up for the needs of the borough and for those people that don't have a voice, as that voice of the people, as Kendi said as well.
Ms. Alvarez, would you like to give a rebuttal?
No.
Mr. Hayne, would you like to give a rebuttal? Let me go on to the registrant questions. The remainder of the questions I asked this evening will have been from registrants. Mr. Hayne, we'll begin with you. As mayor, what will you do to help re-stimulate our local downtown economy?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that council fortunately, having wonderful people on are already doing, working with Lewisburg Downtown Partnership, working with the Community Zone, of which I'm a partner from PAIPL. Some of the work that I'm also doing with PAIPL is trying to mitigate flooding. All of these things are part of a broader strategy that I think that the borough needs to work with our partners, business and individual and groups, the university, to create something cohesive to move forward into the future. So the stimulation has to occur as a cross-sectional kind of endeavor that brings all parties together in that endeavor. It's not a one-stop shop, not a single solution for it, but rather really pulling people together. And that's, again, kind of the purpose of the mayor, is to be able to bring all of the wards and all of these different segments of our community together in that singular kind of voice and opportunity.
Ms. Alvarez, as mayor, what will you do to help re-stimulate our local downtown economy?
I think that one of the issues that we've had with coming back from this pandemic has been a focus primarily on established businesses and not necessarily looking at what we can do to stimulate new businesses, create innovation and opportunity. And I know that while there's significant funding available for established businesses through the CARES Act and the PPP funds, we really haven't looked at opportunities for people to create new businesses. And we have great resources in our area for new businesses through the Small Business Development Center and the Startup Incubator. And I think it's really important to focus on starting new businesses and having spaces for them to be able to bring industry and bring resources into our community.
Mr. Hayne, would you like to do a rebuttal?
Sure. So I don't disagree with what Kendi said, but I think that to get a situation in which businesses, in which the environment is conducive to attracting those businesses, nurturing those businesses, and sustaining those businesses, there have to be other kind of structural conditions met. So, for example, lowering insurance costs by mitigating the flood zone would be a massive one, or lowering electrical prices, lowering other taxes, lowering other things that can remove obstacles, I find have to be primary, and then working with the partners to encourage all of the other things that she was discussing.
Ms. Alvarez?
Yes, I would say that all of those factors need to be in place, but I would also argue that there are tons of businesses that exist in our region that are unofficial businesses, and helping those people to reduce the barriers to entry, and specifically having a physical place where they can belong, like the startup incubator at the SBDC provides a wonderful place for us to be able to retain new businesses within our region.
Okay. The next question from the audience: how will you keep Lewisburg's history alive while growing the borough for future vitality? Ms. Alvarez, you can begin.
I think that we have to be careful when we focus on history. I think far too often when we focus on history, it is central to a particular type of history in our region. And it's important that when we look at the history in Lewisburg, it's more than just the buildings and the physical structure. It's also definitely about the people and their experiences. And we need to make sure that we highlight the people more than the buildings, because the reality is we live in a river town, and the river does cause quite a bit of damage, but it's the people who stay and the people who are resilient, and we need to focus on them more than on the structures that exist within our town.
Mr. Hayne, how will you keep Lewisburg's history alive while growing the borough for future vitality?
So both as a professional historian and as the council member on the Historical Architecture Review Board, there are ways that we can pursue those strategies that maintain both the kind of aesthetic that people come to Lewisburg for and enjoy on a daily basis, while simultaneously pursuing development and opportunities for people in both business and housing and recreation and everything else. The structures, the town, the people of this borough have been always moving and changing, and there's no need to try to completely stagnate that. But I think that there is also a broader desire to maintain elements of this town that make it unique from others and make it such a jewel in the valley. That being said, even on our work session the other day about floodplain issues, I made the joke of the historic architecture doesn't really matter if we become Atlantis. There have to be certain things that need to give to be able to mitigate major threats to our community.
Ms. Alvarez, would you like to give a rebuttal?
I wholeheartedly agree with David. The change is as constant as the river flows, and we have to understand how to navigate change as a community, and that is changing the facade of our community in ways that prepare us for a vital and functional future.
Mr. Hayne, would you like to give a rebuttal?
Yeah, I think also there's many projects that I have tried to put into the works in council that I would like to see come to fruition that could pay for electricity for a significant portion of the population of the borough, as well as all borough facilities, could reduce other costs to the borough and thus reduce the burden of taxes that would go to those specific things. But Kendi and I also had a unique privilege to work together recently on Andrew Stool's performance about the Agnes hurricane flood. And I think that the response from the community and what that flood meant for the community was potent for both of us.
Well, our next question is about flooding, so it's very timely. Flooding poses a threat to borough safety and fiscal security. What actions would you prioritize to mitigate against this risk? Mr. Hayne?
So, as I said, I'm already with PAIPL planting about 100 trees as a riparian buffer in the municipal properties behind Market Street, north of Market Street. We just began that work the other day, and hopefully we'll have it finished by Arbor Day, which I hope everyone can come out and help me plant some trees. I've also planted now across Pennsylvania approximately 7,000 trees this year alone, and it might be 10,000 by the end of the year, which about 1,000 of which are in our valley to try to mitigate flooding and increase biodiversity, things like that. Shade trees obviously are also another element of this in that they help retain soil and mitigate flooding in a variety of different ways. Other than that, we have many different opportunities to work with our property owners and others, as well as the county commissioners, to try to figure out ways that will not prevent the next flood, but prepare us for it. And that's an important statement, because there is no stopping this change. There is no stopping the flood. It is being ready and being appropriately prepared to stop death, stop property damage, and move forward.
Ms. Alvarez, flooding poses a threat to borough safety and fiscal security. What actions would you prioritize to mitigate against this risk?
We have, as David said, no choice but to face the fact that it's going to flood again. It is not a matter of if, but when. And it's important that we look at the way that our town functions, and the way that the water comes in. And then we specifically address ways that we can slow the floodwaters when they do come, and to make sure that we have adequate resources to take care of our community after the flood. And I think that definitely the work that David's doing in planting trees is good. I think we also need to pay more attention to what's happening in and around our river, and not just at our riverbanks, but further north, because it is not just our community, but it is the river as it floods ahead of us, and knowing what to expect that we have to deal with.
Mr. Hayne, would you like to give a rebuttal?
Sure. So just shortly, so two things. One, I've been recently working on a plan to try to essentially fully mitigate flooding from Bull Run. which would then not only open up a significant portion of the borough to development, but also massively reduce flood insurance costs for property owners across the borough, while simultaneously keeping the borough's green space and potentially expanding it. Beyond that, I mean, Kendi's right, it's not just our specific borough, it's all of us around us. So we do need to work with other partners, but it's primarily the creeks that flood, not as much the river, just because of the nature of our alluvial plain.
Ms. Alvarez, would you like to give a rebuttal?
Nope.
Moving on. Ms. Alvarez, we'll begin with you. Do you support the passage of a human relations ordinance in Louisburg?
So this one is complicated because I am of the philosophy that we need to do what we can to bring people together, not tear them apart. And in theory, a human relations ordinance just sets a standard for how we believe that people should be treated. And I think that it's the kind of thing that makes sense. I also recognize that in our current community, in this current political environment, telling people that this is what we think you should think and what we believe you should act and what you should do within our community has a tendency to rub some people the wrong way. And it does a little bit more to tear people apart than bring people together.
Mr. Hayne, do you support the passage of a human relations ordinance in Lewisburg?
So since its initial proposal on council, my first response when it was proposed was to deeply go into the language of the ordinance as it was initially proposed and pull it apart line by line, because we needed to be careful with how we did this and how it would be received and how we would move forward with it. As a result of some of my preliminary comments, my ongoing work with those who had proposed it, both in the community and on council, it has improved, it has gone through legal review, it is getting better. There are more than 50 communities across Pennsylvania which have passed it or something like it. I think there's a lot to be said that is good for this HRO. I would love for the state to actually just pass these addendums to their existing HRO. So in general, I say, yes, I am in support of it, but I think that we need to be absolutely careful with how we do this. I don't actually agree with Kendi's characterization of it, but about how we do it because of both legal premise as well as what it means for those people that get tied up on it, on both sides of the HRO.
Okay. Ms. Alvarez, would you like to give a rebuttal? Mr. Hayne, would you like to give a rebuttal?
I can rebut a non-rebuttal.
You'd like.
No, it's okay.
Our next question, we'll begin with Mr. Hayne. What do you believe should be the borough's approach to regional cooperation and services?
Absolutely central to the future of our community. It reduces long-term costs. It makes services better. It is the future of local and regional municipal government, period, full stop. That being said, it is not easy, as we have seen by the legal matters that I've basically been dealing with since I came on council. And it won't get easier. I mean, we need to figure out ways of working with our neighbors that are constructive, that benefit the community, and seek the goal of better services for lower costs at the highest possible quality for all. And that can only really be obtained through collaborating and pooling those resources, especially in the size and type of our community.
Ms. Alvarez, do you believe, what do you believe should be the borough's approach to regional cooperation and services?
I believe that we should focus on cooperating as much as possible. Very much agreeing with what David had said, that it does keep costs down. It provides us with additional resources, and it's necessary because the physical boundary lines of our communities are overlapped very often, because people will live in the borough and work in East Buffalo Township, or live in one county and work in another. And we are essentially a regional community, and we have to function as such.
Mr. Hayne, would you like to give a rebuttal?
Sure. So the only thing I want to say is just to assuage any fears from certain parties that I don't think either Kendi or I are talking about merger. That is not the word. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about working together. It's important. We are not separate communities. We are one greater Louisburg, one greater valley, and we should take that with us whenever we go into these discussions. And I would love to see more of the communities. I would love Kelly to be closer with us. I would love Montandon to be closer with us. And for things like the regional fire, for things like sewer, it's much easier.
Ms. Alvarez?
I agree wholeheartedly. We have entire communities of people who have not left our region, but they've left the town of Lewisburg and they've left the, county of Union, but they haven't left the Susquehanna Valley. And the reality is that this valley is very much interconnected and intertwined, and we have to treat it as such and make sure that the resources that are available extend through all members of our communities.
Thank you for that. Moving on to the next question. We'll begin with Mr. Hayne. Do you have suggestions for improving the relationship between Bucknell and the borough?
Certainly. I mean, my wife is a tenured professor there, so I know so much of the university and their administration, and have applied for positions there myself. I think that as I've heard Kendi state publicly as well, the town gown has to be a priority. It was a priority for our current mayor, Judy Wagner, and it has to be back. We can't ignore Bucknell. I mean, especially for Kendi and my ward, we literally have part of Bucknell's campus in it. We need to work collaboratively, and the president of council, Deborah Sulai, and I have, as of last week, been in regular communication with the president and many of the administrators at Bucknell to try to figure out the parties in the downtown or roads, or like there's so many things that we need to collaborate and continue to do so. That relationship is key to the survival of both entities, the borough and Bucknell.
Ms. Alvarez, do you have suggestions for improving the relationship between Bucknell and the borough?
Yes, I, as a Bucknell alum, recognize the very interesting and interconnected relationship between Louisburg Borough and Bucknell University. And while Louisburg is a college town, it is also a river town. And we have a very tenuous relationship with both at times. And we need to work on being better at being both, and recognizing that we are a college town and building that relationship with Bucknell, not only with Bucknell students, but that the entire community benefits when we have more Bucknell professors and Bucknell staff within our community, whether that's living and playing in addition to working. And not just seeing ourselves as a place where people pass through and they are transient, but encouraging people to establish roots in our community.
Mr. Hayne, do you have any rebuttal?
So the only thing I would say is that we on council, and I in particular, I mean, many of us are also spouses of or related to Bucknell in some way. We reach out to specific departments and many different elements to literally include them in our project. So if we have something about flooding, I want flooding related professors to be part of that. I want students to be part of that. And I think we do as much of that as possible. I mean, for this riparian buffer, I had almost 100 Bucknell students helping me, and it was fantastic. And that's what we could do in the future if we really have a town gown kind of relationship.
Ms. Alvarez?
Yeah, that's a prime example of why it's important to have the town gown, and to really take advantage of not just the wealth of knowledge that these amazing academics bring, but also the curiosity that comes with the students and the opportunities that creates for them to put to practice some of the things that they're studying on campus.
Another kind of downtown question. Do you have any suggestions for addressing the noise pollution issues in town? Ms. Alvarez?
So I know that this is one of those hot button issues currently because it's spring. So we've got the trucks that pass through because, they've now realized that they can just cut right through Market Street as opposed to going around. And we've got motorcycles that have a tendency to make a little bit of noise. And when you're passing in between buildings, that noise just reverberates. I think we have to be careful not to push too hard on the motorcycle population because we might have some unintended consequences. I know that they're looking at doing a sound study. And so it's really important that we see what that brings. And then from there, see how we can address issues as they continue.
Mr. Hayne, do you have any suggestions for addressing the noise pollution issues in town?
So I just checked the attendees list to see if Mike Milosevic was on so that I could see. He's the primary originator for most discussions about noise. So there's three essential things in the borough that are going on. The one was the large trucks that were taking through Lewisburg stuff for the thruway from quarries and stuff like that. There was traffic like Weiss trucks and other large like freight trucks, and then there's vehicular traffic, normal vehicular traffic, both cars and motorcycles. And I would push back on Kendi a little bit. I agree with her that obviously people do point at the motorcycles most, but it's also a lot of cars that are modified or revving their engines or things like that, as well as the trucks. The study that Chief Yost has described, which I pushed him to get the machine for, I looked into the ordinance to push him for, and I've been pushing for several months, needs to be something that happens this summer, because the sound for those properties on Market Street, just off Market Street, can become too much, as well as the pollution that winds up on the facades of our beautiful historical architecture.
Ms. Alvarez, do you want to give a rebuttal?
No.
Mr. Hayne, anything further on that point?
I just think Kendi and I both agree that this is a delicate situation, and we're not trying to hunt down any people. I don't want to point a finger at any specific segment, but it is one that we need to address, and that using the sound machine appropriately and figuring out its use and continuing, as I have with Chief, to figure out how other communities have done this is an important element of what we need to do going forward, and the mayor should be doing, especially.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Ms. Alvarez, what ideas do you have for increasing recreational opportunities within the borough?
I think that we need to take advantage of being a river town. I feel like we don't connect downtown to the river. And I think that's in part because where it does connect to the river is a bit residential. So I would like to see more activities closer to Soldiers Park, connecting with other river towns and launching recreational activities that begin in Milton at the park and then end downtown Louisburg. I know that having the table down by the boat launch has really increased the use of that, as well as in Soldiers Park. So really just tying downtown closer to the river and making us an established river town would help that.
Mr. Hayne, what ideas do you have for increasing recreational opportunities in the borough?
So one that I've been working on for a few years now has actually been to try to figure out a space, and an appropriate space, for a dog park, because that's been something that a lot of people in the borough have come to us about. There's a lot of complications, financial, related to insurance and the floodplain and a lot of other things. But I think that it's a worthwhile project to move forward with because of how many dogs there are actually in Lewisburg. And it would also help with, the waste that gets left on the street and stuff like that as well. I think utilizing the river is fantastic. It is problematic because of the private property. There's ways to work with them. But I think that what Kendi's describing might be something more that the borough can help facilitate with other entities like Lewisburg Neighborhoods and LDP. And there's a lot of great partners that we could have in such work, but I don't know if it would be a borough thing as much as like what we could do with our properties is potentially a little bit easier and more fruitful in that way. Not more fruitful, but more possible. Let me say it that way.
Ms. Alvarez, do you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, I would say that while a dog park in the borough does help with residents in the borough, I think one of the other things that we have to consider is that Louisburg is a destination, and just as we see with Unpaved, it is a destination for outdoor activity. And I think that we could tie the river to some of that, which then leads to additional revenue and some additional possibilities beyond just satisfying our residents.
Mr. Hayne, any further rebuttal?
So we also have the Greenway plans that will change Kidsburg quite a lot in that it will make it even more adaptable and friendly for creative play and outdoor play for kids. And my son actually attends the River Valley Nature School, which is an outdoor school. And I know children just glom onto that kind of activity. So I would love to go forward with the Greenway, but also the other side of St. Mary's Park, the open field, there are currently studies and plans going from Andrew Stoll and others to figure out the best use for that space.
We'll begin this question with Mr. Hayne. The borough has made a number of adjustments due to COVID. Do you think any of these should be kept in place?
I mean, I think that having hand cleansing stations, I think the grant that we were able to get for a bathroom project in Hoofnagel Park, I think, safety protocols related to the borough office. There's a variety of smaller things that would be definitely fruitful to continue. And then some others that I think would also be nice, like having online payment of tickets and other bills so that we can process them with credit cards, which I've been working on for a number of years. Or, the party permit thing also is something that is an ongoing negotiation with both the police department as well as local residents. I don't know exactly where that will fall post-COVID, but I think at least for now it needs to be in place, as well as the tables that we've placed across the borough with LGP and Lewisburg neighborhoods to try to encourage that outdoor space and recreation and local businesses.
Ms. Alvarez, the borough has made a number of adjustments due to COVID. Do you think any of these should be kept in place?
I definitely think that, as David said, the outdoor spaces that we've created, as they will be expanded this year, I'm working on the committee with that, and I feel like that has brought some additional resources to our community, and at a time when we really needed them because of COVID, but something that will continue to be needed because even after this pandemic is over, it provides the opportunity for people to sit outside and enjoy what is very special about this small town while enjoying the food from our restaurants. I think some of the programming that's come together with organizations like the Campus Theater, the Community Zone, and LDP, those sorts of things, that collaborative effort will continue long after we've released some of these restrictions from COVID.
Okay. Mr. Hayne, do you have any rebuttal?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay. Ms. Alvarez, any rebuttal? Otherwise, I'll go on to my last question. Our last community question, we'll begin with Ms. Alvarez. What do you see Louisburg looking like in 20 years?
Much of the same, but a little bit different. I think that many of the staples of our town, things that are memorable, like the post office and the campus theater, will remain, much like our beloved 3 globe streetlights. But I think that there are some serious things that we have to look at, in part the river and the functions of the river in our community, the creek, but also housing, because we are growing as a community, but we are limited by our boundaries. So how do we grow? And what changes can we make to sufficiently provide adequate housing for people who want to be a part of this community?
Mr. Hayne, what do you see Louisburg looking like in 20 years?
I would love to see us maintain as much of what really makes us a beautiful community while simultaneously having 10 years more of productive growth that serves us all. So as I said, like better electrical utilities that can be greener, better flood mitigating practices, better roads, lower taxes that relate to those because we've figured out how to pay for them for less. I think that their housing, as Kendi said, is a fantastic idea and should be pursued. And I think we should do it in a way that doesn't contribute to flooding by impermeable surface while simultaneously develops the community in both ways that are conducive to growing businesses as well as the residents of this community. And I also see obviously our neighbors' development growing quite a lot, and for that relationship to then become appropriately balanced.
Ms. Alvarez, any rebuttal?
I would say that we know that everyone is experiencing growth. Like right now, look at the shortage of housing across the board. It's nationwide. And in a rural community, we feel the pressure more strongly because we can't just turn around and have a multi-unit property, erected. Not only is there construction limitations, but there are also zoning restrictions that prevent it. And so I think that as a community, we have to re-examine and reevaluate and figure out if there are barriers that are preventing us from having our own growth.
Mr. Hayne, any further rebuttal?
Just that I hope that we, come together as a community in these 10 years to figure out these very pressing issues, right? I mean, these are not going away. Housing, flooding, energy, jobs, business, community building activities and events, they're all fundamental to who we are as a community. And I think that that's a community that I want to maintain and grow all of those positive aspects for.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Hayne. You may proceed with your closing statement. You have 1 minute.
Well, I've been very fortunate to be welcomed into this wonderful community that, growing up not in this area, I was not aware of, though my great-grandfather actually was from Sunbury. So I suppose to an extent I'm coming back to the area family-wise. I am just so honored to have been able to serve on council, and I'm very proud of the work that I've done on council, both in an official capacity as well as through the community. And members of our community like Kendi are absolutely wonderful contributors to what makes it vibrant. And I think that I am well suited both in my kind of administrative capacity through my professional life as well as my personal commitments to this community to lead as mayor. And all I have to say is si se puede.
Ms. Alvarez, you may proceed with your closing statement. You have 1 minute.
I want to thank everyone for attending today and listening to both David and I talk about what we love about this community and this region. I think that it is those of us who care and participate by being involved in the election process and taking the chance to run, while also doing the work even if we aren't necessarily granted a position. That it's really important that as a community, every one of us decides that we can provide some bit of a gift back to the community that has given us so much. And that's really all that I'm looking to do as mayor, to give and feed into so that 15, 20 years from now, there's somebody else who feels inspired to be involved because they saw someone like me.
Well, to the candidates, thank you for participating in this event. The League, the voters of the 17th Judicial District, Lewisburg Borough, Union County, appreciate your willingness to present yourself at this event. To our audience, we know you had other choices of things to do tonight. You came to this event because you wanted to know more about the candidates you will be voting for in the May election. Our league thanks you for attending. Please remember to sign up for a candidates night this Thursday at 6:30, featuring the candidates for the Lewisburg Area School Board and Milton Area School Board District 3. Registration can be found at our website, lwvlewisburgarea.org. In closing, I want to mention that there will be 4 ballot questions on the May 18th ballot. The ballot questions propose 3 separate amendments to the Constitution of Pennsylvania and 1 question, which is a statewide referendum. The amendments are based on a joint resolution of the General Assembly of Pennsylvania. If an amendment question is approved by a majority of the voters, that amendment will become law. In Pennsylvania, we have closed primaries, meaning you can only vote for the candidates in the same political party you have named in your voter registration. However, all voters can vote on ballot questions during the primary. Additional information on the ballot questions can be found in our League of Women Voters Louisburg Area Voters Guide, which is on our website, and vote411.com. Now it is up to all of us, the voters, to go out and vote on Tuesday, May 18th. The polls are open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you enjoyed this event and have an interest in joining the League of Women Voters, please contact us on our Facebook page, League of Women Voters Louisburg Area, or again on our website, lwvlewisburgarea.org. Thank you for joining us, and good night.